Shami Yashar'Al, Alahyanawah, AHAYAH, Accad, Shabbat, Shalom, Yashar'Al. Rise, O Israel. Welcome to World War III. Our reference today will be Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29. Now, to get things started, Indigenous Hebrew Israelite Awakening is not a racist hate group. We simply live here. We're going to be talking about a racist character. Many of you know him by the name of President Jefferson Davis. Now let's get to it. Here's a quote. My own convictions as to the Negro slavery are strong. It has its evils and abuses. We recognize the Negro as God. I say again, we recognize the Negro as God and God's book and God's laws in nature. Now I could stop there, but let's keep going. Quote, tell us to recognize him, our inferior, fitted expressly for servitude. You cannot transform the Negro into anything 1/10 as useful as good as what slavery enables them to be. And that is the quote from the Confederate State of American President Jefferson Finis Davis, unquote. I mean, literally, this guy is calling us, or calling the Negro, those of you who are descendants of slaves and slaves. And for those of you who say that the black people are not the Israelites, will go to the Triumphal song of Merneptah, the victory Stele of Pharaoh Merneptah, line 27, the people of Israel are laid waste. It's the same thing that President Davis wrote about the Negroes, so where's the confusion? Now let's go back into history a little bit. We have the Interpretatio graeca and the Interpretatio romana are both comparative methodological processes used to translate the history of two or more different cultures. That meaning the Roman equivalent of the Greek god would have different names in the different cultures, but they're used as the same god. So the Roman god Hermes will be similar to an Egyptian god, sort of say. So what's happening here is that they use this process to put it on top of the Hebrew gods as well. Thereby making a cross comparison of similar gods and goddesses. This is like an ancient attempt to untwist the tongues the Most High changed at the Tower of Babel. Pay attention. The Interpretatio Romana, comparative social science of the Romans, shows us Tyre or Tiwas, the Tiwas room, which is Tyre's Day. Today in our tongue, our English tongue, we call it Tuesday. That's where this word is derived. So Tyre is the god or power or the ancestors of the Germanic people. The imperial code of the Romans also show us that their people, like the high social status, they made of themselves gods. Like, say, the Caesars, he was a statesman, he was a warrior, then he made himself a god, and all of his children were gods, sort of say, in that culture. And again, Tuesday, if you drop the T and exchange it with a D as Deuce or Z as Zeus, you're pretty much saying Tuesday is Zeus's day, or Deuce, which is the Latin for God, God's day. So these things, this comparative reasoning or this comparative social science goes back all the way back to these Interpretatio graeca and Interpretatio romana. Please remember that while we're discussing Hebrew Israelites, Hebrewisms of Africa. because this is what the Europeans have done to us. Um, and let's get another quote from Davis. The withdrawal of a state from a league has no revolutionary or insurrectionary characteristic. The government of the state remains unchanged as to all internal affairs. You get this. It is only its external or Confederate relations that are altered. To term this action of a sovereign a rebellion is a gross abuse of language. Let me reread that. To term this action, which the action of war, they went to war against the southern states who professed slavery, went to war against the northern states who were trying to eliminate slavery. He was saying to term this action of a sovereign state a rebellion is a gross abuse of language, because they all have their state constitutions and they are united by the United States Constitution. So he's saying that the federal government was going against the sovereignty or the sovereign act of the state. And you'll see that even today. Jeff Sessions, former, I guess he's working with the government, former justice, I guess. Jeff Sessions wanted to sue California for the immigration laws. You know, those coming in at the border. They had I guess places where the immigrants can hang out for a while until they became citizens. Well, Jeff Sessions, and under the I'll say Twitter administration, I don't want to say his name, you know, they wanted to sue the state of California. And California, which is the land where I derive from, pretty much gave them the middle finger. Now, in biblical terms, our ancestor Asaph, the recorder, in the Psalms told us that AHAYAH, the great I am, stood in the midst of gods. That right there just throws away that Trinity thing. He stood in the midst of gods in judgment. And you can see Psalms 82 for that. Isaiah in chapter 41. I need you guys to read Isaiah chapter 41 slowly and completely. His prophecy to us shows the pathway to the chosen children of God. Not any Christians, not no Jewish people, not no Arabic Mohammedans, none of those other Abrahamic faiths. Isaiah is showing a path to the chosen children of God, the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Here he who is called the first and the last. In Hebrew is Alahyanawah. And in the Interpretatio graeca, which English speakers are using today, they call him the Alpha and Omega. So right here, the Alpha and Omega in Isaiah chapter 41 is saying that he will be a helper and a redeemer to the scattered children of Israel. Right here in Isaiah chapter 41. Go back and read that. So this just throws Christianity and all the rest of those additions to the old covenant, it throws that all off. Because the Alpha and Omega is right here saying, I am going to help those chosen children wherever they are that they have been scattered. Literally, a people who are highly abused by other nations. It's right there, plural. And this is just a test to those human trafficking, murderous people who call themselves Christians, to try to graft themselves onto a promise That right here, the Alpha and Omega is saying that, he's going to go and save those people. The reference to President Jefferson Davis's book would be his book, The Rise and the Fall of the Confederate Government by Jefferson Davis, and it was copyrighted in 1881, New York Public Library. Now, 1881, this man lived until 1889. That's like some 30 years after the Civil War. 30 years after. They murdered President Abraham Lincoln, but then they got this guy influencing people after the war. Think about that. To finish this off, we have Jesus Christ in the book of John, chapter 10, verse 34, saying, Jesus answered the Jewish people, I'm not going to say Jewish, I'm going to say the ancient Hebrews. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said ye are gods? Now, stop. In your law, meaning the Hebrew Israelites' law. Not the Greco-Roman laws, not an Egyptian law, not any other law, but the Hebrew law. It is written in their law. You see, our forefathers called us Naga, Neguste, Niger, Negro. And that name right there means Prince of the Power, gods. So if we are being called gods by our ancestors, it is our ancestors' law that tells us that we're gods. This Jesus, who is known by Christians as the Alpha and Omega, is telling the Israelites that they are gods. Our psalmist forefather, Asaph the recorder, has recorded and said, this is where Jesus gets his information, said that ye are gods, that Alpha and Omega. And even here, in the reference that I've given to you by the President Jefferson Finis Davis, he is saying, we recognize the Negro as God, and God's book, and God's laws. And then he tries to tear it down. You make that decision yourself. God does not need bullets, depleted uranium, airplanes, or anything to help his people. You can ask the rocks, you can ask the water, you can ask the trees. He can use the entire earth to help those people that he's going to help. I am your conscientious objector. I am a minister of peace, and I am also a Hebrew Israelite. Hebrew Israelite.